Hey, you made it back. The world's gone quiet outside your window. Good. You're going to need that stillness for what comes next. Tonight, we're walking into a place where the temperature swings 40 degrees between noon and midnight, where a single mistake in reading the land means your bones bleach white in 3 days, where 5,000 years of survival knowledge got compressed into techniques so precise they look like magic until you understand the physics. The Arabian Desert, the Negev, the Syrian Hamada, doesn't matter which, they all want you dead with the same patient efficiency. Just so we're clear, in this environment you're basically a water balloon with legs, losing a litre of moisture every hour through skin you can't stop sweating through. Be glad you're under a duvet and not squinting at a horizon that shimmers with heat mirages. Real talk before we go further. If this kind of content works for you, the deep dives into how humans actually survived impossible places, hit subscribe. Like the video if you're genuinely into it. Otherwise, just settle in and let the story do its work. Drop your sleep station in the comments if you want, city and local time. There's something weirdly comforting about knowing people all over the world are falling asleep to the same voice, talking about techniques for not dying of thirst. Now, lights down. Maybe get a fan going for that soft background hum. And let's walk into the kind of heat that turns spit to paste in your mouth. Pre-dawn. The temperatures drop to maybe 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough that your breath fogs slightly. Cold enough that the sand's gone firm under your knees instead of that loose, sliding powder that'll swallow your boots come noon. You're kneeling in a valley between two dunes, and the Bedouin elder 20 feet to your left is watching you with the kind of patience that comes from teaching this test to children for 40 years. He's already selected the stone. Size matters here. Not too small, not so large you can't lift it overhead. About the mass of a clay jug, maybe 15 pounds. Dense. Sandstone works poorly. You need limestone or granite, something that'll carry sound downward instead of absorbing it. Lift it, he says. His Arabic's got the guttural edge of someone whose family's been moving between the Hijaz and the Nafud since before maps had these regions labelled. You hoist the stone chest high. Your shoulders complain. You've been walking since yesterday afternoon, and every muscle's got that deep ache that comes from dehydration you're trying to manage with rationed swallows from a skin that's 2/3 empty. Higher. Overhead, arms fully extended. The sky's still that deep purple-black of pre-dawn. Stars so bright they look close enough to touch. No moon. The Milky Way cuts a river of light north to south. Now, listen before you drop. The sound travels down, then back up. You're hearing what the earth wants to tell you. You let it fall. The impact, a solid thud, but there's something else underneath it. A resonance. Not quite an echo, but a hollowness, like tapping on a door and hearing the empty room beyond. The sound doesn't die immediately. It rolls somehow, deeper than the surface where the stone hit. The elder nods once. 20 feet down, maybe 25. Groundwater table. We dig here, we'll hit wet sand by sunset if 3 men work it. This technique, the stone echo test, predates Islam, predates Christianity, goes back to when these trade routes were moving frankincense north and tin south. Nobody wrote it down because nobody needed to. You teach your sons by demonstration at age 7, and they teach theirs the same way. And the knowledge moves forward, wrapped in calloused hands and early morning lessons, exactly like this one. The physics. Sound waves travel differently through soil saturated with water versus bone-dry sand. Dry sand dampens sound quickly. All those air pockets between grains absorb the energy. Wet sand, especially sand sitting atop a groundwater table, conducts sound deeper and reflects it back with a characteristic resonance. You're listening for the difference between thudding into a pillow and thudding onto a drum skin stretched over a chamber. Takes practice. You'll drop 50 stones in 50 locations before you start hearing the distinction. 100 before you trust your ears enough to commit to a digging site. But the Bedouin child who grows up doing this can tell you at age 12 whether to dig or keep walking, can estimate depth within 5 feet, can differentiate between a shallow pool that'll dry by August and a permanent aquifer that's been feeding this region since the last ice age pushed water tables higher. The elder walks 30 paces west, selects another stone, lifts it, drops it. Dead thud. Sound dies instantly. Nothing here, dry down to 40 feet, probably deeper. He's not guessing. 50 years of walking these dunes, dropping stones, digging where the sound promises water and avoiding where it doesn't. That's an education you can't get from books or satellite imaging or ground-penetrating radar. The sun's edge cracks the eastern horizon. Light spills across the dune tops, and within minutes the temperature starts climbing. 60 degrees becomes 65, becomes 70. By noon, it'll hit 120 in the direct sun. Hot enough that touching bare rock will blister skin in under 10 seconds. You've got a decision point now. The stone says water's here, 20 feet down. Do you dig? Depends on your situation. 3 men working in shifts, digging during the cooler hours before dawn and after sunset, can excavate 20 feet through sand in maybe 18 hours of labor. But you need water to sustain that work, at least 2 liters per person per shift. If you've only got 1 skin left and it's running dry, you're gambling everything on the stone being right. Bedouin clans didn't gamble often. The oral histories mention families who bet wrong, dug for 3 days, hit bedrock at 15 feet with no water above it, and never made it to the next well. Their bones joined the thousands of others scattered across the empty quarter, the Rub al-Khali, where temperatures hit 130 and the sand dunes run 300 feet tall, and the nearest permanent settlement is 200 miles in any direction. But when the stone said water, and you had enough hands to dig, and your navigation put you 3 days from the next known well, you dug. Because the alternative was rationing yourself into slow death, watching your tongue crack and your urine turn dark amber and then stop altogether, watching your vision tunnel and your thoughts scatter until you're wandering in circles, convinced you see palm trees on horizons that hold nothing but more sand. The elders already marking the dig site. 4 stones arranged in a square, each one placed with the flat side down. When his cousin passes through here in 3 months, those stones will tell him, "We dug here, we found water. The well's active unless winds buried it." Water doesn't move much underground, he says, watching you process this. Not like rivers, more like... He pauses, searching for the right comparison. Like blood through flesh, slow seepage through stone and sand. It sits in pockets between rock layers, trapped there since the rains fell 5 years ago, 10 years ago, sometimes 100 years ago, back when this whole region got more winter storms. Historians argue whether the Arabian Peninsula has been drying progressively for 3,000 years, or whether it cycles through wet and dry periods on timescales beyond human record-keeping. Either way, the aquifers under your knees are fossil water, ancient, irreplaceable, and increasingly sparse as you move deeper into the interior. The sun's fully up now, heat's building like a physical weight. Time to move to shade, wait out the killing hours, dig when the temperature drops below 100. That's the rhythm here. Read the land in early morning coolness, shelter during the furnace noon, work when the sun releases its grip enough that you won't cook inside your own skin. You'll remember this stone drop lesson. Not just the technique, but the sound. That hollow resonance that means life instead of death. The difference between arriving at the next oasis and becoming one more set of bones the sand will bury and the wind will uncover and bury again across centuries. Drink now, 1 careful swallow. Let it sit on your tongue before letting it slide down. Make it count. Noon. The heat's gone from uncomfortable to actively hostile. 118 degrees Fahrenheit, in the slice of shade you're pressed into beneath an overhanging rock shelf. Even the lizards have vanished underground. The air shimmers, bends light, turns the middle distance into liquid mirages that promise water and deliver nothing but more superheated sand. But there, 200 yards out across open dune face, something's moving. Dark, swirling, concentrated in one spot instead of scattered. Flies, thousands of them. Your guide's already noticed. He's been watching that spot for 10 minutes, motionless except for his eyes. Finally, water was there, maybe 3 days ago, maybe 2. Flies don't swarm randomly in the desert. They're brutal opportunists, yes, but they're also perfect indicators of moisture. In a landscape where standing water evaporates at an inch per day, where rainfall might total 2 inches annually, where humidity drops below 10% routinely, flies congregate only where water's pooled recently enough that the sand beneath still holds dampness. The swarm you're watching isn't feeding on anything dead. It's harvesting moisture from soil that's retaining the last remnants of a rain pool, a spill from someone's water bag, a camel's urine from 72 hours ago. Doesn't matter the source. What matters, that spot's wetter than the surrounding sand. And wet sand tells you where to dig for the water table. But there's technique to reading fly clouds. Not every swarm means water worth excavating for. Size matters. A thin scatter of flies, 20 or 30 insects, just means something died there yesterday and they're interested in decomposition fluids. Not useful. You want density. A black, roiling mass, thick enough to see from a quarter mile off. Hundreds of flies at minimum, thousands if the water source was substantial. Movement pattern matters. Flies feeding on carrion disperse and return. Disperse and return. Erratic, searching behavior. Flies harvesting moisture stay put, hovering in a concentrated column that doesn't drift much even in wind. They've found what they need. They're not searching anymore. Time of day matters. Early morning fly activity means the moisture's still present. Sand holds overnight coolness, condensation's active, the water table's close enough to the surface that capillary action keeps pulling dampness upward. Afternoon fly swarms like the one you're watching now. That means the moisture was abundant enough that even after 6 hours of brutal evaporation, there's still something worth their time. The Bedouin don't have microscopes or formal entomology training, but they've observed fly behavior for so many generations that the knowledge runs deep as any scientific paper. An old Bedouin proverb: follow the fly to water, follow the water to life, follow life away from your grave. Your guide's doing calculations. Distance to the swarm versus heat expenditure versus water reserves versus likelihood of finding anything useful. The math's brutal. Walking 200 yards in 118-degree heat will cost you a quarter litre of water through sweat and respiration. Assuming you walk slowly, rest every 50 yards, don't let your core temperature spike. If you dig and find nothing, you've burned resources you might need for the next well. Still 8 hours walk northeast. But if the flies are right, we go at sunset, he decides. Temperature drops, the work costs less water. And if there's moisture, it'll seep upward as the sand cools. Better digging. So you wait. 3 hours pressed into shade that's barely shade, rationing water 1 mouthful per hour, watching your urine turn darker. Field note: if it's darker than beer, you're already in trouble. Darker than coffee, you've got maybe 12 hours before your kidneys start shutting down. The fly cloud doesn't disperse. That's encouraging. Sunset comes with that sudden temperature plunge deserts do. 118 becomes 90, becomes 85 in the span of 40 minutes. The light goes golden, then orange, then purple. The flies start settling as darkness comes, but the swarm location's fixed in your guide's memory. You walk. Sand's still warm underfoot, holds heat for hours after sunset, but the air's breathable now. Your lungs stop feeling like you're inhaling from an oven. 200 yards takes 15 minutes at the pace your guide sets. Steady, deliberate, no wasted motion. The spot's obvious up close. The sand's got a darker tone, grey-brown, instead of the pale beige surrounding it. You kneel, scoop a handful. Definitely damper. Not wet enough to drip, but it clumps instead of running through your fingers like sugar. Dig. You start excavating by hand. No tools. Tools are weight you can't afford to carry. Just hands and patience. 6 inches down, the sand's noticeably cooler. 1 foot down, it's actively damp. You can press a handful and watch moisture darken your palm. 2 feet down, you hit it. Not standing water, not yet, but sand wet enough that when you squeeze it, actual drops fall. Your guide produces a leather cup from his bag, presses it into the sand and waits. Capillary action does the work. Water seeps through the leather pores, begins pooling at the bottom. 5 minutes gets you maybe 2 ounces. 10 minutes gets you 4. Not fast, not convenient. But in a landscape where water means the difference between walking out alive and dying face down in sand drifts, 4 ounces every 10 minutes is salvation. You'll collect maybe a litre this way before the seepage slows to nothing. Not because the water table's exhausted, but because nighttime cooling limits how much moisture keeps rising through capillary action. Come dawn, when the sun heats the upper sand layers again, the process reverses. Surface water evaporates, the moisture gradient shifts, and this spot dries back to barely damp. But you've got a litre. That's tomorrow morning's ration for 2 people. That's the buffer between desperate and dead. The flies knew. They always know. You just have to read them right. Trust the old knowledge that says where insects gather, moisture lingers. And where moisture lingers, humans can survive 1 more day into a journey that's already pushed past the limits of what seems possible. Field note from a Bedouin water-finding manual that exists only in spoken tradition, passed elder to student across generations. The desert hides water from eyes, but not from wings. Watch what flies, watch what crawls, watch what grows. They'll show you what the sand conceals. You drink half the litre now. The rest goes in the skin for tomorrow. The night's cold settles in. Temperatures drop to 60, and you'll shiver until dawn wrapped in your robe, too exhausted to care much, glad to be alive, grateful to insects for their perfect, unthinking guidance. Dusk. The sky's gone indigo at the zenith, fading to copper and rose where the sun just dropped below the western dune line. The temperature's plummeting. 90 degrees becomes 80, becomes 70 in the first half hour after sunset, and the landscape's transforming from hostile furnace to something almost beautiful in the failing light. Then you hear them. Wings. Hundreds of wings. Thousands. Moving with purpose instead of the random scatter of sparrows or the lazy circle of ravens. A sound like tearing paper, amplified, directional, passing overhead from northeast to southwest in formations so tight they could be one organism instead of a flock. Sandgrouse. Pterocles species, specifically Pterocles senegalis in most of the Arabian Peninsula, though Pterocles orientalis dominates further north. Doesn't matter for your purposes. What matters? Sandgrouse drink twice daily, dawn and dusk, and they fly directly from feeding grounds to water sources with navigation so precise you could set your compass by their flight path. The Bedouin have been following sandgrouse to water for at least 3,000 years, probably longer. Cave paintings in the Judean desert show hunters tracking birds toward what might be well sites dated to the Bronze Age. The technique predates written history, survives in oral tradition, and remains one of the most reliable water-finding methods in regions where wells can be 50 miles apart and unlabeled on any map. Your guide's already tracking their heading. Southwest, maybe 260 degrees. Water's that direction. How far? He watches the flock's altitude, their speed, the tightness of their formation. 30 kilometers, maybe 35. They're not desperate yet, so the source is reliable. The physics of sandgrouse navigation is fascinating and still not completely understood by ornithologists. The birds can detect water sources from 40 miles away, possibly through some combination of visual cues, the greener vegetation around oases, olfactory sensing, moisture content in air currents, and learned routes passed through generational behavior. Adults teach juveniles the flight paths, and those paths remain consistent across decades unless the water source dries completely. Unlike most desert birds, sandgrouse don't get their water from food. They need to drink, daily. Their breeding behavior depends on it. Males soak their breast feathers at water sources and carry moisture back to chicks too young to fly. This means sandgrouse populations concentrate around permanent water, and their flight patterns become predictable highways, pointing toward wells, springs, and oases. But there's technique to tracking them effectively. Time of day matters critically. Dawn flights, roughly 30 minutes before sunrise, show birds heading toward water they'll drink from at first light. Dusk flights, starting about 40 minutes before sunset and continuing until dark, show birds returning from daytime feeding grounds to water sources they'll drink from before roosting. You want the dusk flights. They're heading toward water now, not away from it. Flight altitude indicates distance. Low-flying sandgrouse, maybe 50 feet up, are within 5 kilometers of their target. They're descending already, slowing, preparing to land. Medium altitude, 200 feet, puts the water 10 to 20 kilometers out. High altitude, tiny silhouettes against the darkening sky barely visible, means 30 plus kilometers. They're still in transit mode, covering ground fast. Formation tightness indicates water reliability. Loose, scattered flocks suggest multiple water sources in the general direction. Birds are diverging toward different locations. Tight, arrow-straight formations mean a single, well-known source that the entire population depends on. You want tight formations. Scattered birds might lead you toward a seasonal pool that's already drying. Numbers matter. A few dozen sandgrouse suggest a minor water source, maybe a rock catchment or small seep. Hundreds indicate a substantial well or spring. Thousands, which you're seeing now, wave after wave passing overhead, mean a major oasis, something that supported bird populations and human settlements for centuries. Your guide's committed. We walk tonight, 35 kilometers, 8 hours at good pace. Reach the water by dawn, rest through the heat, refill completely. It's a gamble. 8 hours of night walking will burn 2 liters of water per person, maybe more if the terrain's difficult. You've got 3 liters total between 2 people. That leaves 1 liter reserve if the sandgrouse are right. If they're wrong, if the water source dried recently, if you misread the distance, if the formation veered off course, you're in severe trouble by noon tomorrow. But sandgrouse are rarely wrong. The Bedouin saying, trust the bird before the map, trust the map before the stranger, trust the stranger before your own thirst-mad eyes. You start walking. The stars emerge fully now, no moon yet, but the Milky Way's so bright you can navigate by it. The sand's still warm underfoot, radiating stored heat. 65 degrees, pleasant, almost comfortable. That'll change around midnight when the temperature drops to 50 and you're shivering while walking. Every hour, another wave of sandgrouse passes overhead. They're all heading southwest, all maintaining that same tight formation, all moving with the urgency of creatures who know exactly where they're going and need to get there before dark makes landing impossible. At hour 3, your guide spots something else. Camel tracks, also heading southwest. Fresh, maybe 6 hours old. The hoof prints are deep, which means the animals are carrying weight. Loaded camels don't wander randomly. They're being guided toward known water by humans who've walked these routes before. The convergence of signs, bird flight, camel tracks, the gradual greening of vegetation, as scattered drought-resistant shrubs appear every few hundred meters, confirms what the sandgrouse promised. Water ahead. Major water. Hour 7, the sky is starting to pale in the east, pre-dawn. And there, low on the horizon, the silhouette of palms. Real ones, not mirages. Date palms require water table access, need their roots in permanent moisture. Where palms grow, wells exist. The sandgrouse were right. They're always right. You just have to read their language, trust their knowledge, and commit to walking through the dark on nothing but faith in bird navigation, refined across millennia. The well, when you reach it at dawn, is stone-lined and ancient. Probably Roman construction, maybe earlier. 40 feet deep, maintained by the Bedouin families who pass through seasonally, who know this well like you know your own name. The water's cool, slightly brackish from dissolved minerals, and tastes like salvation. You'll drink a litre immediately, refill every container you carry, and rest here through the killing heat. The sandgrouse will arrive in waves throughout the morning, thousands of them landing, drinking, departing. You're sharing water with birds who've been showing humans where to find it since before history got written down. Field note: never ignore the birds. They know what you don't. Mid-morning. The heat's climbing toward 100 degrees, but you're focused on something that looks dead. Acacia tree. Acacia radiana, probably, though might be Acacia tortilis. Doesn't matter much for your purposes. What matters, the thing's 30 feet tall, which is absurdly large for a desert acacia, and it's standing alone 200 yards from the nearest vegetation. Everything about its placement seems wrong until you understand what you're looking at. A signpost, a living marker that says, groundwater here. The tree's canopy is sparse, thin leaves, twisted branches, bark that looks like it's been scoured by sandblasters, which it has been. Wind-driven sand at these velocities acts like industrial abrasive, strips paint off metal, scours wood down to grain, polishes rock faces to glass smoothness. That the tree survives at all is remarkable. That it thrives enough to reach 30 feet is impossible unless it's accessing water sources invisible from the surface. Your guide walks you to the base. Look at the trunk. See the diameter? 18 inches across at chest height. In a region where rainfall totals 3 inches annually and surface water evaporates before it can penetrate more than 6 inches into sand, a tree this substantial needs constant moisture supply. It's not getting that from rain. Root system, he says, kneeling to scratch at the sand near the trunk. Goes down 40 feet minimum, maybe 50, punches through sand and clay layers until it hits the groundwater table, then spreads laterally to maximize absorption. The tree's basically a straw plugged into an underground aquifer. This is how Bedouin clans map water. Not with satellite imaging or ground-penetrating radar or hydrological surveys. With botany. Where certain plants grow, water exists beneath. The depth varies, the volume varies, but the presence is certain. You just have to know which species indicate what. Acacia, deep taproots, accessing groundwater between 30 and 60 feet down. Presence indicates permanent water table, not seasonal accumulation. If you dig near an acacia of this size, you'll hit wet sand eventually. Guaranteed. But there's more detail to read. Canopy density indicates water table depth. Thick canopy, fully leafed out even in summer, waters may be 30 feet down. Easy digging in soft sand, accessible by a single person in 3 days of labor. Sparse canopy like this one, leaves thin and scattered, waters deeper, 45, 50 feet. You'll need help, multiple diggers working in shifts, a week minimum to excavate through increasingly compact layers. Trunk circumference indicates aquifer volume. Thin acacia, 6-inch trunk. You're looking at a limited seep, maybe enough for one family group to survive, but not enough to sustain a permanent settlement. This monster trunk you're examining suggests substantial flow underground, enough to support the tree through decade-long droughts, enough to justify digging a well that'll serve a clan for generations. The tree's isolation is the most telling sign. Acacias don't grow randomly. Seeds disperse via wind and animal transport, yes, but they only germinate where conditions permit. This tree's standing alone because the groundwater here is concentrated. A subsurface channel, a fault line where water accumulates. Something geological that creates a perfect access point. Dig here, you're hitting the main vein. Dig somewhere random 50 feet away, you might miss it entirely. The Bedouin have well-documented oral histories of families who've held rights to specific acacia-marked wells for centuries. The wells get named after the families who dug them. Bir el Arabi, Bir Msalam, Bir Haddad. The trees outlive the diggers, outlive their grandchildren, stand as permanent landmarks in a landscape where sand dunes shift and reform constantly. Your guide's scratching calculations in the sand, 45 feet deep, accounting for trunk size and canopy spread. 3 men working dawn and dusk shifts, 6 days to hit water, need 15 litres per person per day to sustain that labour in this heat. 90 litres per day total. For 6 days, he pauses. 540 litres just to dig the well. The math is brutal. But the alternative, walking past a clear indicator of groundwater because you're unwilling to invest the time and resources to extract it, means potentially dying 20 miles further on when your reserves run dry. The decision tree for Bedouin water management has to account for current water reserves, number of people in the group, estimated distance to next known well, season. Summer makes everything worse. Current health status of the group, political safety. Some wells are controlled by specific tribes, and trespassing costs you blood, not just water. But the tree doesn't lie. It's standing there, roots penetrating 45 feet down, tapping into water that's been flowing beneath this desert since the end of the last ice age. The knowledge embedded in these botanical indicators is as precise as any hydrological survey. More precise, actually, because it accounts for microtopography and geological variations that satellite imaging misses. There's a quirky belief among some Bedouin groups that acacias call water, that the trees somehow attract groundwater to their root systems through unknown processes. Historians argue whether this is misunderstood causality. The trees grow where water already exists, not the reverse. Or whether there's some legitimate biochemical interaction between root systems and subsurface moisture migration. Either way, the practical application remains identical. Find the acacia, find water beneath it. Field note from generations of desert survival. The acacia stands where your grandfather would have dug. Trust the tree's roots more than your own eyes. Your guide marks the site with 3 stone cairns arranged in a triangle, points facing northeast. Any Bedouin passing through will read that as well site marked, groundwater present, dig if you need it. The trees provide the initial knowledge, the stones preserve it for whoever comes next. You move on. The acacia stays, roots still pulling moisture from 45 feet down, still marking salvation for travelers who know how to read what it's telling them. 3 hours before dawn, the temperatures drop to 48 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that your breath fogs, cold enough that the sand's gone hard as packed clay underfoot. The stars are brilliant. No moon. Just the Milky Way and the planets and the satellites humans have put up there since the last time Bedouin families used these exact techniques to survive journeys that would kill most people within 72 hours. Your guide's selecting stones, not the large ones used for the echo test. These are smaller, fist-sized, smooth. He's choosing by weight, by density, by surface texture. Needs to hold cold well, he explains. Limestone works, granite's better, sandstone's worthless. You're about to learn the pre-dawn dew harvest. It's a technique so old it predates Arabic, predates Islam. Goes back to when humans first figured out that desert nights create conditions perfect for extracting moisture from air too dry to support rain. The physics. When the sun sets, the sand surface radiates heat rapidly into the clear night sky. Temperature drops 40–50 degrees in the span of 3 hours. This creates a massive temperature gradient between the still warm subsurface sand and the now cold surface. Air currents rising from deep sand hit the cold surface, and the moisture in that air, minimal, yes, but present, condenses on anything cold enough to drop below the dew point. The dew point in desert air is typically somewhere between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Get an object down to 45 degrees, and any water vapor in the surrounding air will condense on it. Not much, maybe a few grams per square inch of surface area. But multiply that by a dozen stones, wait patiently for 3 hours, and you can collect enough to matter. Your guide's digging. He's excavating a shallow pit, maybe 8 inches deep, 2 feet across. Deep sand stays warmer longer. We're using that temperature difference. He places the selected stones in the bottom of the pit, spacing them an inch apart. 12 stones total. Then he covers the pit loosely with his robe, not sealed tight, just draped to create an air pocket, while still allowing moisture-laden air to circulate from below. Now we wait. 3 hours minimum. The stones cool to surface temperature. The air rising from warm sand below keeps bringing fresh moisture. Condensation accumulates, you'll see. 3 hours of sitting motionless in 48-degree cold. Your body's burning calories just to maintain core temperature, about 200 calories per hour, which translates to needing water for metabolic processes, even though you're not sweating. The night desert is deceptive this way. Feels comfortable, even pleasant compared to daytime inferno, but it's still extracting resources you might not have to spare. The stars wheel overhead. Orion's setting in the west. Scorpius is rising in the southeast. You can track time by constellations if you know them. The Bedouin do have star-based navigation refined to the point where they can estimate their position within 5 miles using nothing but overhead reference points and horizon landmarks. 2 hours in, your guide checks the stones. Not yet. Surface isn't cold enough. The moisture harvesting depends entirely on radiative cooling. On cloudy nights, this technique fails. Clouds trap heat, prevent the ground from radiating warmth into space, keep surface temperatures too high for condensation. On windy nights, it's less effective. Moving air disrupts the temperature gradient. You need clear skies, still air, and patience. 3 hours. The eastern horizon's starting to pale, pre-dawn glow, maybe 40 minutes before actual sunrise. Your guide uncovers the pit. The stones are wet, not dripping, but definitely damp, a sheen of moisture coating every surface. He picks up the first stone carefully, tilts it over a leather cup, and runs his finger along the surface to collect the condensation. Maybe half an ounce from the first stone, a full ounce from the second. It had a rougher surface texture, more area for condensation to accumulate. The third stone's nearly dry. Apparently was sandstone despite his careful selection. Didn't retain cold effectively. 12 stones. He works through them methodically, scraping every drop into the cup. Total harvest, maybe 8 ounces. 2/3 of a cup. Not much. But in a landscape where you lose a litre of water per hour during midday heat, 8 ounces represents 30 minutes of life you wouldn't have had otherwise. This technique scales poorly. You'd need hundreds of stones to collect a meaningful volume, and the labour of placing and harvesting them becomes prohibitive. But it fills a specific niche in desert survival. The emergency measure when you're completely out of water and the next well is still 2 days away and you need something, anything, to sustain you through one more sunrise. There's historical documentation of Bedouin travelers surviving for weeks using condensation collection, combined with camel milk and extreme rationing. Not thriving, barely surviving, constantly on the edge of fatal dehydration, but alive. The dew harvest bought them extra days. Days turned into weeks. Weeks got them to wells that saved them. The quirky part: this technique is nearly impossible to explain to outsiders who haven't experienced it. The idea that you can extract drinking water from desert air sounds like nonsense until you're holding a cup with 8 ounces of moisture that literally wasn't there 3 hours ago. It violates intuition about how dry climates work, seems too simple to be effective, and requires patience most people can't sustain when they're desperately thirsty. But the physics doesn't care about intuition. Cold surfaces below the dew point collect condensation. Period. The Bedouin figured this out thousands of years before anyone formalized the thermodynamics, refined it through trial and error, passed it down as essential knowledge. When you have nothing else, the desert night will still give you moisture if you know how to ask. Your guide drinks half the collected water immediately, offers you the rest. Take it. You'll need it more than I will over the next 6 hours. The sun's breaking the horizon now. Temperatures already climbing. 50 degrees, 55, 60. The killing heat's coming back. But you've got 8 ounces you didn't have before. 8 ounces extracted from air that seemed too dry to hold anything. Field note: the desert gives grudgingly, but it gives. You just have to know where to look and how to wait. The clouds aren't close yet. They're bruising the southern horizon maybe 30 miles out. Dark grey at the base, fading to purple-black at the tops, where they're punching maybe 15,000 feet up into atmosphere that's usually achingly clear. You've been watching them build for the past hour, watching the pattern develop, and your guide's face has gone tight in a way that means calculations are running fast. Storm's moving, maybe 20 miles per hour, perpendicular to our route. You're standing in a wadi, a dry riverbed that maybe sees water twice a year, sometimes not even that. The banks are 20 feet high on either side, carved into the sand and underlying rock by floods that happened decades ago, centuries ago. The wadi floor is flat, hard-packed, easier walking than loose dune sand, which is why you're down here instead of up on the ridge, which is also why you might be about to make a fatal mistake. Flash floods in desert wadis kill people, kill them regularly, kill them without warning except for the signs you need to read correctly, or you're crushed under a wall of water that appears from nowhere, carrying boulders and uprooted trees and enough force to flip vehicles and shred anything organic into paste. Your guide's reading the clouds, not casually glancing at them, actively decoding every visual cue the storm's providing. Height of the cloud base. The lower the base, the more intense the rainfall underneath it. These clouds are low, dark at the bottom, which means heavy precipitation. Not the light drizzle that evaporates before hitting ground. Real rain. Inches per hour, potentially. Cloud color. Grey means rain. Purple-black means torrential rain, possibly hail. These are purple-black. Direction of movement. The storm's tracking northeast, which puts it on a collision course with the elevated terrain 15 miles south of your current position. When that rain hits the hills, it'll sheet off hard-packed surfaces, funnel into drainage channels, and pour into this wadi system from every tributary within a 50-mile radius. Wind direction, starting to shift, was blowing north-south. Now it's swinging east-west. That means the storm's outflow is reaching you, the cold air pushed ahead of heavy precipitation. When the wind shifts like this, you've got maybe 90 minutes before water arrives. Your guide's already moving. Up, out of the wadi, now! The bank's steep but climbable. 20 feet of scrambling through loose sand and embedded rock, grabbing shrubs for handholds, trying not to slide back down. You make the top with 60 seconds of hard effort, and immediately see why he's urgent. The wadi stretches east-west for miles, a meandering channel carved through landscape that looks bone-dry and harmless. But every tributary, every small drainage channel feeding into the main wadi, is positioned to capture rainfall from the elevated terrain to the south. When the storm hits those hills, the water has nowhere to go except down, and down means into this exact channel you were just walking through. The math is horrifying. 15 miles of elevated terrain, call it 100 square miles of watershed. Storm dropping 2 inches of rain in an hour, conservative estimate given the cloud darkness. That's 100 square miles times 2 inches times the conversion factors. Roughly 6 million cubic feet of water trying to drain through a channel that's maybe 30 feet wide and 10 feet deep. The water won't fill the channel neatly. It'll arrive as a front, a wall of churning brown liquid carrying everything it's picked up along the way. Boulders weighing tons, trees uprooted from the rare oases, sand compressed into battering rams, moving at 15-20 miles per hour, enough force to crush a camel, enough force to strip flesh from bone if you're caught in it. The clouds are closer now, maybe 25 miles out. The wind's picked up, gusting maybe 30 miles per hour, carrying the smell of rain. Actual rain smell in a desert that hasn't seen precipitation in 8 months. Ozone and dust and the mineral scent of water on hot rock. 90 minutes, your guide repeats. Maybe 2 hours if the storm slows. We need high ground and we need to stay there until the flood passes and the water drops back to safe levels. There's a ridge another quarter-mile north, elevated maybe 60 feet above the wadi floor. You walk fast, not running. Running burns water you can't spare, but moving with purpose. The temperature's dropping as the storm approaches. It was 105, now it's 95 and falling. The air pressure's changing too. You can feel it in your ears, a subtle building pressure that precedes major weather systems. Historical records document Bedouin clans who read these signs wrong and paid for it. Whole family groups caught in wadis during flash floods, swept away, bodies found miles downstream days later when the water receded. The desert forgives many mistakes. You can recover from taking a wrong direction, from spilling water, even from mild heat exhaustion. It doesn't forgive being in a wadi when the flood comes. You reach the ridge with 40 minutes to spare. The storm's visible now. The rain curtain beneath the clouds looks solid, opaque, a grey sheet connecting sky to ground. It's maybe 10 miles out. The temperature's dropped to 85 degrees. The wind's constant now, 35 miles per hour, hot and dry and carrying sand that stings exposed skin. Then you hear it. Not the rain, that's still miles away. You hear the flood coming up the wadi. A sound like distant thunder, but constant, building, getting louder. The water's running ahead of the rain that created it, pushed by the pressure of millions of gallons, trying to drain through an inadequate channel. The wall of water appears around a bend in the wadi, half a mile east. It's maybe 8 feet tall at the front, brown with suspended sediment, churning with debris, moving fast, 15 miles per hour at least. As you watch, it hits a narrowing in the wadi, and the front surges higher. 12 feet now, maybe 15, backing up against the constriction before forcing through with enough force to erode the banks visibly even from this distance. The flood fills the wadi completely in under 3 minutes. Where there was dry sand, there's now a raging river. It'll run for hours, the storm's dumping water continuously, and the watershed's huge. By tomorrow morning, it'll be down to a trickle. By tomorrow afternoon, back to dry sand. But right now, being down there means death. Guaranteed. Your guide's watching with the expression of someone who's seen this before. survived it before, knows exactly how close you came to being in that water instead of safely above it. The desert's patient, he says. It'll wait years for you to make one mistake. Then it kills you in 3 minutes. The rain reaches your position 20 minutes later. Actual rain, falling from the sky, soaking into sand that hasn't been wet in 8 months. It's glorious and terrifying, and over in 40 minutes. 2 inches of precipitation, just like the clouds promised. You'll collect maybe 2 liters from runoff, pooling on rock surfaces before it evaporates or soaks away. That's tomorrow's water ration. But you're alive to drink it because you read the clouds. Trusted the old knowledge about storms and wadis and how fast death can arrive when water finally comes to a place that usually has none. Field note: in the desert, water is life. In the wrong place at the wrong time, water is death. Know the difference. The well you're about to dig doesn't exist yet. It won't exist for 4 months, maybe longer if the sand layers prove difficult, if you hit rock formations that require careful excavation around instead of through, if the water table's deeper than the surface indicators suggest. You're standing at a site 3 miles from the nearest known well, looking at converging signs that say, water here, deep but present. There's a dead acacia, dead for maybe 20 years based on the decay pattern of the remaining trunk, which means groundwater was here historically. There are camel tracks crisscrossing the area in patterns that suggest seasonal grazing, which means the camel's Bedouin owners believe vegetation here gets moisture from subsurface sources. And when you dropped the test stone this morning, you got that characteristic hollow resonance that indicates aquifer presence at depth. You'll dig alone. This is traditional. A man proving he can provide water for his family, establishing rights to a well site by virtue of the labor invested in creating it. Once you hit water, the well belongs to your family line. Your sons will maintain it, your grandsons will improve it, and 4 generations from now, your great-great-grandchildren will know this well by the name it'll earn. Beer, your family name. The excavation plan. You'll dig during the coolest hours, 3 hours before dawn until 2 hours after sunrise. That's maybe 5 hours of work per day when temperatures are below 90 degrees. The afternoon heat, 120 degrees in summer, makes physical labor potentially fatal, so you'll shelter and rest from mid-morning through late afternoon. Day 1 is marking the perimeter. The well needs to be wide enough to dig in comfortably, but not so wide that the walls become unstable. 4 feet across is standard. You scratch the circle in the sand using a rope tied to a central stake. Basic compass geometry, unchanged since humans started digging wells in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. The first 10 feet go fast. The sand's loose, easy to excavate by hand. No tools required beyond a leather bucket to haul sand up and out. You're removing maybe 3 cubic feet per hour, working steadily, careful not to push so hard you overheat. Water consumption for this labor, 3 liters per 5-hour shift. You've got 15 liters stored from the last well, which gives you 5 days of digging before you need to make a water run back to the known well 3 miles away. By day 3, you're down 12 feet. The sand's getting damper, not wet, but definitely holding residual moisture. Good sign, means you're approaching the water table, though approaching might still mean another 20 feet of digging. Day 5, 15 feet down. The sand's compacting now, harder to excavate, requiring you to loosen it with a sharpened stick before scooping it into the bucket. Your water reserve is down to 3 liters. Time to make the run back to the known well, refill completely, return, and continue digging. The water run takes 8 hours round trip. 3 miles each direction, but you're carrying empty water skins on the way there and 40 pounds of full skins on the way back. The trip costs you 4 liters in sweat and respiration. You'll collect 20 liters from the known well, arrive back at the dig site with 16 liters remaining. Enough for 5 more days of work. Week 2, you're down 25 feet. The walls are holding. Sand's compact enough at this depth that collapse isn't an immediate risk, though you're reinforcing the upper 10 feet with stones arranged in a rough circle to prevent erosion. The digging's gotten harder. Each bucket of sand requires 15 minutes of loosening and scooping. You're removing maybe 1 foot of depth per day now, instead of the 3 feet per day you managed in the loose upper layers. The water table should be here. The stone test said 20 to 25 feet. But the sand's still dry, damp in patches, definitely wetter than surface sand, but no actual moisture pooling. Week 3, 30 feet down. You're starting to second-guess the site selection. 30 feet is a long dig with no water yet. Your reserves are strained. You've made 3 runs back to the known well now, and each trip is taking psychological toll beyond the physical labor. Doubt creeps in. Maybe you read the signs wrong. Maybe the water table dropped in the years since the acacia died. Maybe you're excavating a dry hole that'll never produce anything but more sand. Week 4, 33 feet. You hit wet sand. Actually wet. Squeeze a handful and moisture drips from your fingers. Not water pooling yet, but capillary moisture rising from an aquifer somewhere below. The confirmation feels like vindication. You weren't wrong. The water's here. You just have to reach it. Week 6, 40 feet down. The water's seeping now. Slow accumulation, maybe an inch per hour pooling at the bottom of the excavation. You're letting it collect overnight, scooping it into skins come morning. 3 liters per night. Not enough to sustain the dig indefinitely, but enough to reduce your trips back to the known well. Week 8, 45 feet. The seepage has increased. 6 inches of water per hour. You're producing more water than you're consuming for the digging labor. This is the threshold, the point where the well becomes sustainable, where you can maintain it instead of constantly running back to external sources. Month 3, you start the finishing work. The well's producing reliably, 10 liters per hour during active seepage periods, less during the heat of the day when the water table drops slightly. More during cool nights when condensation adds to the flow. You're lining the upper sections with stones to prevent collapse, creating steps carved into the walls for descent when the water level's low. Building a windlass from acacia wood and rope to make hauling buckets easier. Month 4. The well is complete, 47 feet deep, producing 20 liters per hour sustainably, accessible via stone-reinforced shaft with carved steps. You mark it with a 3-stone cairn, visible from 2 miles in any direction. You perform the traditional ritual, drink first from the well you dug, thank God for the water, and name it Beer, your family name. The well will outlast you, might outlast your grandchildren. Bedouin clans will navigate by it, travelers will depend on it. Birds and animals will drink from it. The labor of 4 months becomes a permanent addition to the landscape's infrastructure. One more dot on the mental maps carried by every Bedouin who travels this region. Field note: water you dig yourself tastes sweeter than water you're given. Not because of mineral content or temperature, because you earned it through 4 months of labor that proved you could provide for your family in a place that wants everyone dead. Your water skin's empty, completely dry. Hasn't had moisture in it for 8 hours now. The sun's at its peak, temperature pushing 125 degrees. And the next known well is 2 days' walk northeast, assuming you maintain pace and direction. 2 days without water in this heat means you'll be dead in 36 hours. Probably less, given you're already dehydrated enough that your urine stopped completely around mid-morning. The camel standing 10 feet away is looking at you with that expression camels have. Superiority mixed with mild contempt and the certain knowledge that it'll outlive you by about 48 hours, even though you're both in the same lethal environment. Here's the thing about camels. Everything you think you know about how they store water is wrong. The hump isn't a water reservoir, never was. It's fat, pure adipose tissue that the camel metabolizes during periods of scarce food. 40 pounds of fat in a healthy camel's hump, which converts to energy but provides minimal water when metabolized. The myth about water-filled humps has been around for centuries, gets repeated in children's books and bad travel guides, and is completely false. But camels do store water, just not where people think. A camel can drink 25 to 30 gallons in 10 minutes when it has access to water. That liquid doesn't go into a dedicated storage organ. It diffuses throughout the bloodstream and into the spaces between cells. The camel's blood cells are shaped differently than most mammals. They're oval instead of round, which allows them to swell to nearly twice their normal size without rupturing. The blood itself can thicken dramatically without causing circulation problems. So when a camel drinks 30 gallons, most of that water ends up distributed through 75 litres of blood and interstitial fluid throughout its body. The camel then rations that water with brutal efficiency, barely sweating even in 120-degree heat, producing urine so concentrated it's almost syrupy, breathing through its nose in a way that recaptures moisture from exhalation. A healthy, fully hydrated camel can go 2 weeks without drinking in summer heat, longer in winter. The Bedouin can't match that. Humans need 3 to 4 litres daily minimum, more if working or walking. Which means, in survival situations, the camel becomes a mobile water source. But accessing it requires knowledge and willingness to do things that seem extreme until you're desperate enough that dying becomes the worst option. Your guide's already kneeling next to the camel. First option, stomach contents. Camels are ruminants. They chew cud, regurgitate partially digested food, process it through multiple stomach chambers. The rumen, the first stomach chamber, contains maybe 15 litres of liquid mixed with semi-digested vegetation. It's disgusting. Smells like fermented grass and bile. Has the consistency of thin soup with chunks of plant matter floating in it. But it's liquid. And in the desert, liquid means life regardless of how repulsive the source is. Your guide shows you the technique. Pressure applied to the camel's abdomen in a specific location causes it to regurgitate. Camels do this naturally while chewing cud, so you're not harming it, just triggering a normal physiological response. The camel spits up maybe half a litre of rumen contents. It's greenish-brown, warm, acidic, absolutely vile. You strain it through cloth to remove the solid chunks. What remains is still disgusting, but drinkable. Maybe 300 millilitres of fluid that your body will absorb despite your stomach's protests. It's not clean water, contains partially digested plant material, stomach acids, bacteria. But in the short term, the next 24 hours you need to survive until reaching the next well, it'll keep you functional. Second option, your guide says, is blood. This is more extreme, requires careful technique to avoid harming the camel, and the Bedouin only do it in genuine emergencies because a camel that's been bled is weakened and more vulnerable to death itself. The technique, a small incision in the neck vein, just deep enough to allow blood flow, but not so deep it's difficult to stop. You collect maybe half a litre in a leather cup. The blood is dark red, warm, body temperature, which is higher than human temperature, maybe 101 degrees. You can drink it straight, though the iron taste is overwhelming and it's thick enough to be difficult to swallow. More commonly, you mix it with camel milk if the camel's lactating. Half blood, half milk. The mixture is less viscous, easier to drink, and provides both hydration and calories. Bedouin mothers sometimes feed this mixture to young children during severe water shortages. It's that effective as an emergency ration. The blood provides approximately 400 millilitres of fluid, but it also provides protein and salts that your body's desperately lacking after days of dehydration. It's not pleasant. It's possibly the least pleasant drink you'll ever consume, but it works. The incision gets sealed with pressure and desert dust. The dust acts as a clotting agent, crude but effective. The camel will recover the lost blood within a week. You've gained another 12 hours of life. Third option is the most extreme, your guide says quietly. Direct blood transfusion. This technique is documented in historical accounts, but rarely practiced anymore. It involves connecting your circulatory system directly to the camel's, typically by making cuts in your forearm and the camel's leg, pressing the wounds together and allowing camel blood to flow directly into your veins. It's dangerous. Human and camel blood aren't compatible for transfusion in the medical sense. Different blood types, different cellular structures, high risk of immune response and clotting. But in the immediate term, the next few hours, it can work. The fluid enters your bloodstream, your blood pressure stabilizes, and you gain enough functionality to keep walking. The historical accounts mention Bedouin travelers surviving for days using this technique, though many died afterward from complications. Modern medicine would call it insane. But modern medicine doesn't account for being 2 days from the nearest well, with zero water and certainty of death without intervention. You opt for the stomach contents and blood mixture. Drink half a litre of the combined liquid, trying not to think too hard about what you're consuming. Your body absorbs it. Your blood pressure stabilizes slightly. The tunnel vision that was starting to close in retreats. The camel watches you with that same contemptuous expression. It's lost maybe a litre of total fluid between the regurgitated stomach contents and the blood draw. It'll be fine. You've gained enough to keep walking. 2 days to the next well. You'll make it now. Barely, but you'll make it. Field note: the desert doesn't care about dignity. It only cares whether you survive. The Bedouin learned thousands of years ago that survival sometimes requires drinking things that would make you vomit under any other circumstances. You'll learn it too, or you'll die. Those are the only options. You're kneeling at the junction of 2 sand dunes, looking at something that shouldn't exist. Damp sand in the middle of a landscape where the last rain fell 6 months ago and surface water evaporates within hours. The dampness is maybe 2 feet below where the dune slopes meet, in a small valley depression that's barely noticeable unless you're specifically looking for it. This is salt flat topography in miniature, the same principle that creates the massive salt flats of the Sahara, just at smaller scale. And where salt accumulates in deserts, water's been present. More importantly, where specific topographical features converge, water can still be extracted even long after surface moisture has vanished. Your guide's already digging. When 2 dunes meet, they create a low point. Rain falls, even just a ½ inch, and it runs down both dune faces, pools here at the bottom. Sand acts as a filter and a storage medium. Water seeps down, hits clay or bedrock layer underneath, can't percolate further, sits there in a trapped lens between soil layers. The excavation reveals the stratification. First 2 feet, dry sand, pale beige, powdery. Next 6 inches, darker sand, slightly damp, compressed. Then a transition layer, sand mixed with clay, even damper. Then, 2.5 feet down, actual wet sand that darkens your hands when you touch it. But here's the complexity. The water's not sitting in a neat pool you can scoop from. It's distributed through the sand matrix, held in the spaces between grains by capillary action and surface tension. To extract it, you need to understand how water behaves in porous media. You dig deeper. 3 feet down, the sand's saturated enough that when you press a handful, drops fall from it. But there's a dry layer beneath this wetness. Another 6 inches of relatively dry sand. And beneath that, at 4 feet, another wet layer. This is what your guide meant by soil strata. The water didn't seep straight down and pool at the bottom. It encountered layers of different permeability. Clay layer stops downward movement. Sand layer allows lateral spreading. Another clay layer creates a second trapped lens. The result is alternating bands of wet and dry sand stacked vertically. Each wet band representing a different rain event from different months or years. Keep digging through the dry layer, your guide instructs. The lower wet layer is usually bigger. It's fed by multiple rain events, been accumulating longer. 4.5 feet down, you hit the second wet layer. It's substantially more saturated than the upper one. Squeeze a handful and you get maybe 2 tablespoons of water. The sand here is almost mud, dark brown instead of beige, cold despite the 115 degrees surface temperature 20 feet away. The extraction technique requires creating a collection sump. You dig a narrow shaft another foot deeper into the wet sand, creating a cylinder maybe 6 inches across and 1 foot deep. Water seeps into this sump from the surrounding saturated sand, slowly, driven by gravity and capillary action, but steadily. You wait 30 minutes and check it. 3 inches of water has accumulated. Another 30 minutes, 5 inches total. You're producing maybe a litre per hour this way. Not fast, requires patience and stillness. Any agitation of the sand slows the seepage by disrupting the capillary pathways. But it works. The salt presence here is telling. When water evaporates from sand, it leaves behind dissolved minerals, primarily sodium chloride, calcium carbonate, magnesium sulfate. The white crust you can see on the sand surface in the Dune Valley is salt deposited from dozens of evaporation cycles over the years. Where you see salt crust, you know water's been present repeatedly. And where water's been present repeatedly, subsurface lenses likely still hold moisture, even when the surface appears bone dry. There's a quirky mineralogical fact. The salt actually helps preserve subsurface water. The crust acts as a seal, reducing evaporation from the layers below. In some cases, water trapped beneath salt crusts can persist for years after the last rainfall, slowly seeping deeper until it hits impermeable layers and accumulates in lenses exactly like the ones you're extracting from now. Bedouin navigation includes mental maps of these Dune Valley locations. Not every valley has water, most don't, but the ones that do get marked in oral tradition, passed from father to son. At the crossing of the Red Dunes, 3 days east of Wadi Rum, where the acacia skeleton stands, dig at the valley bottom. That description might encode the location of a water source that sustained travelers for generations. The extraction continues. After 2 hours, you've collected maybe 2 liters from the sump. Your guide digs a second sump 6 feet away, accesses the same wet layer from a different angle. 2 sumps producing simultaneously doubles your collection rate. By evening, you've got 5 liters, enough for 2 people for 1 day in moderate heat, or enough for 1 person for 2 days if you're careful. The sumps will continue seeping overnight, though the rate slows as the immediately surrounding sand depletes its moisture. Come morning, you'll check them again. Might get another liter or 2 before the capillary action slows to nothing. Then you'll mark the location with stones, move on, and add this spot to your mental map of places where water hides in landscape features that look dry but aren't. The technique requires understanding geology, hydrology, and patient observation. You can't rush it. Can't force water to seep faster than physics allows. But when applied correctly in the right locations, it means extracting water from places that appear to have none, from sand that's been dry on the surface for months, but holds moisture 3 feet down in trapped lenses that haven't evaporated yet. Field note: the desert is layered. What you see on the surface tells you almost nothing about what's beneath. Water hides between soil strata, accumulates in invisible pockets, waits for someone who knows where to dig, and how to extract it patiently. Learn to see beneath the surface, or die thirsty while standing on top of water you didn't know was there. The ancient well you counted on is dead. You're standing at GPS coordinates that match the location passed down through 3 generations of your guide's family. A well dug in the 1890s, maintained continuously until the 1960s, supposedly still active based on reports from Bedouin groups passing through 5 years ago. The stone cairn marking it is still here. The acacia that once grew beside it is a dead skeleton, branches white as bone. And the well itself has collapsed. The stone lining has given way, probably during a flash flood when water undermined the foundation. Sands filled the shaft completely. Where there should be a 40-foot excavation down to active water, there's just a depression in the sand, with rubble indicating something was here once, but isn't anymore. Your water reserve, 1 litre between 2 people. The next known well, 3 days northeast at current pace. In summer heat, that math is lethal. 3 days requires minimum 6 litres per person, 12 total. You have 1. This is where everything you've learned converges, where the techniques stop being interesting facts and become the difference between survival and dying badly in a place that's killed thousands before you. Your guide's already reading the land, not panicking. Panic burns energy and water you can't spare, just methodically assessing every indicator visible from this position. First, the dead acacia. It died, which means the water table dropped below its root depth or shifted laterally away from this location. But acacias don't uproot and move. If the tree's roots were accessing water at 45 feet depth and the tree is now dead, either the aquifer's depleted or it's moved geologically. Aquifers don't deplete overnight. That's a process taking decades. More likely, the water shifted. We look for new acacia growth, your guide says. Young trees sprouting in the past 10 years. Their roots will be following current water, not historical water. You scan the area. There, maybe 300 yards northwest, a young acacia, maybe 8 feet tall, thin trunk but healthy foliage. It's alive, which means it's tapped into moisture somewhere beneath it. Second indicator, bird activity. You've seen sandgrouse flights overhead at dawn for the past 2 mornings. They're flying northwest, same direction as the young acacia. The birds aren't following the dead well, they're following active water. Third indicator, the dune valley topography. There's a depression half a mile west where 2 dune systems meet. Classic salt flat formation zone. If the winter rains were even remotely normal, that valley's lower layers should hold trapped moisture. Your guide's building the survival plan. We dig at 3 locations. The young acacia for deep groundwater. That's the long-term bet, but it'll take days to reach water depth. The dune valley for trapped lenses. That's the short-term extraction. Might get us a few litres in the next 12 hours. And we set up condensation traps tonight for the pre-dawn dew harvest. That's the backup, maybe gets us another litre by morning. This is the reality of desert survival when primary water sources fail. You don't rely on single techniques. You deploy everything simultaneously. Stack your extraction methods. Bet on multiple possibilities and hope at least one pays out before your reserves run completely dry. You start with the dune valley. It's closest and fastest. 2 hours of digging through stratified sand layers gets you to the first wet zone at 30 inches depth. You create a collection sump, wait, and start accumulating seepage. It's slow, painfully slow. 30 minutes gets you maybe 3 ounces, but it's something. While the sump fills, you move to the young acacia. Start excavating a test hole near its trunk, looking for the depth where roots hit moisture, just grinding persistence, deploying every technique you know, squeezing moisture from landscape features that appear dry, betting your life on 5,000-year-old knowledge about where water hides and how to extract it. Day 4, 18 feet into the acacia dig, your guide hits wet sand. Actually wet. Squeeze it and moisture drips. He digs another 2 feet, creates a collection chamber, and water begins seeping in. Slow at first, maybe 2 inches per hour, but steady. By evening, the chamber has 6 inches of water, 1.5 liters, enough to stabilize you both, enough to continue the dig deeper, enough to keep you alive until the well produces at sustainable rates. Day 6, the well's producing 5 liters per hour. You've won. Barely, but you've won. The old well's still dead. Will probably stay dead unless someone invests weeks of labor excavating the collapsed shaft and relining it with stone. But the new well, your well, dug in desperation with techniques passed down across generations, is producing water where the land said it should be, if you knew how to read the signs. Your market, 4 stones in a square, points facing northeast toward the next known well. Any Bedouin passing through will read that as new well here, old well collapsed, dig site active and producing. The desert doesn't give anything for free, but if you know what to look for, if you can read plants and birds and soil strata and topography, and combine that knowledge into survival strategy when everything's failed, the desert will give you enough. Just barely enough, but enough. Field note carved into stone beside the new well. When the ancient water fails, the land still holds new water for those who remember how to find it. 6 feet down, you're finding slightly damp sand. The acacia's roots are accessing water, but it's deep, probably 30 feet minimum, maybe more. You mark the location. This is your multi-day dig if the short-term extraction methods don't produce enough. 4 days of labor might get you to active water at this site. 4 days you probably don't have, but it's the backup plan. Sunset comes. You return to the Dune Valley sump. It's produced maybe 20 ounces over 4 hours. You drink half, save half. Your guide's already selecting stones for the condensation harvest, digging the cold collection pit, setting up the night moisture trap. The stars come out. Temperature drops. You wait 3 hours in the cold, then check the condensation stones. They've produced maybe 6 ounces. Added to the sump collection, 26 ounces total. Not enough, not even close. But it's keeping you alive into tomorrow. Day 2, you split efforts. Your guide continues the deep dig at the acacia while you maintain the Dune Valley sump and reset the condensation trap. The sump's producing slower now. The immediately surrounding sands depleted its moisture. You're getting maybe 4 ounces per hour instead of the initial 8. The deep dig reaches 10 feet. Still no standing water, but the sand's getting consistently damp. Promising. Day 3, you're down to 4 ounces of water reserve. Your guide's 15 feet into the acacia dig. You've collected another 12 ounces from the sump, 8 from condensation. You're drinking just enough to avoid complete shutdown. Kidneys still functioning barely, urine dark brown but present, cognitive function compromised but operational. This is what desert survival actually looks like when things go wrong. Not dramatic movie deaths or heroic rescues. The techniques we've walked through tonight, the stone echo tests, the fly clouds, the sandgrouse navigation, the acacia root reading, the dew harvests, the storm predictions, the months-long well digging, the camel blood protocol, the salt flat extractions, the emergency responses when everything fails. These aren't historical curiosities. They're living knowledge passed from generation to generation across 5,000 years, refined through trial and error by people whose lives depended on getting it right. The Bedouins still use these methods. Maybe not exclusively. GPS and satellite phones and 4x4 vehicles have changed desert travel substantially. But the knowledge persists. Children still learn the stone drop test, still watch sandgrouse flights at dusk, still understand that certain plant species mean water beneath the sand, even when the surface appears lifeless. Because technology fails, batteries die, Vehicles break down. Modern navigation becomes useless when you're 3 days into the empty quarter and the sands swallowed your tracks, and the next fuel cache is coordinates on a screen that won't power on anymore. When that happens, and it still happens regularly, you fall back on the old knowledge. The knowledge that doesn't require batteries or satellites or anything except observation and patience and willingness to trust what the land's telling you. The desert's still there, still hot, still dry, still patient, still willing to kill anyone who doesn't respect it. The techniques we've covered tonight are your conversation with that landscape, the way you ask it politely where water might be hiding, the way you interpret its answers, the way you survive in a place designed to kill you within 72 hours if you don't know what you're doing. Rest now. You're safe. You're not actually in the desert, just visiting it through the strange intimacy of someone's voice in the dark, telling you how the techniques are real, the physics is sound, the history is accurate, and somewhere right now, someone's using these exact methods to find water in a landscape that looks utterly dry and completely hostile. Sleep well. The desert will still be there tomorrow if you want to learn more. It's been there for millions of years. It'll wait.